Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Coach Approach Sunday edition, Week 10 show. Coach, how are you?
Fantastic, man. Ready to go. High school football playoff start this week. Liberty Lions, 16th in the country, facing got the number one seed in the overall open tournament. So excited for that. And unbelievable slate of football games this weekend. We've got some Ravens, Bengals, Patriots, Jets on bye. So there's obviously some fallout there, but excited to get the show going, man. How you doing?
I'm not doing too bad. Not doing too bad. Our high school's funny. You guys are 2 weeks behind us. We're
Yeah,
already heading into the semifinals in Southern Section high school football in Southern California. So yeah, there's nothing better than high school football. Go out and see a local game if you haven't lately, because I'll tell you what,
absolutely.
talk about pure joy of the game. That's what those guys do every Friday night. All right, hey, let's jump into the slate. Before we do, we still got a 14-0 game with the Sunday morning
14-3.
game. 14-3. Okay, currently 14. Tampa Bay, Seattle 3. Maybe Tampa Bay's figuring things out now. Let's see. Okay, let's jump into the first game. Detroit Lions 2-6 at the Chicago Bears 3-6. Detroit Lions on offense, they're averaging 23.5 points per game, which is 12th in the NFL. 243 yards passing, 8th in the NFL, and 134 yards rushing, 9th in the NFL. Those numbers are a little skewed as most of those big games came early on in the season, whereas now in the last three games, they're only averaging 16 points a game and 105 yards rushing. Defensively for Chicago, they're giving up 24 points a game, which is good for 21st in the NFL, 200.7 pass yards, 10th in the NFL, and 147.2 rush yards, which is 30th NFL. Out for Detroit, we still have Jamison Williams. It's kind of up in the air if we're going to see him this year. I certainly hope we do, just so we can see, what he can do for that offense. And then Josh Reynolds, he was a late scratch this morning, so don't put either one of those guys in your lineups. But guys to put in your lineups, we've already talked about how the Chicago defense is giving up 147 yards rushing, which means, man, you'd feel pretty comfortable. In fact, not only feel pretty comfortable, I, without any hesitation, am starting Jamal Williams. This year, in 8 games, he's got 126 carries for 554 yards and 8 touchdowns. He's not helping you much in the passing game with 9 catches, but with the volume that he's getting in the rushing attack, man, that guy is a must start. And then his counterpart, the guy that was supposed to be the running back one in the offense, DeAndre Swift, finally has a non-injury designation, which means he is good to go, and I'm firing up in all offenses. Kind of what it's been looking like so far, Coach, and especially last week, is that, Jamal is definitely the running guy, and DeAndre's getting some carries, but he's certainly more utilized in the passing attack. For the wide receivers, man, Amon-Ra St. Brown, that guy's a wide receiver one. 19 targets the last 2 games. That type of volume, you got to fire him up week in and week out. Everybody else, though, in this offense, I'm not comfortable starting. I'm not playing any of the tight ends, whether it be Brock White or Brock Wright. I'm not playing James Mitchell, and I'm probably not playing Jared Goff. Coach, what are your thoughts on this offense of Detroit?
Yeah, I think you hit it on the head. I think what's interesting about the Chicago Bears defense, 147 yards rushing per game. Over the last 3, they've only given 115. But I think that has more to do with the fact that teams are attacking in the passing game a little bit more, as they've given up 100, 245 yards passing per game and 32 points per game. So this is a team that can be scored on if Detroit can figure out how to get that offense rolling again. But yeah, I think it's Jamal Williams and DeAndre Swift show. And of course, I'm Honor St. Brown, especially now with Hawkinson out. You touched on Williams, and I think what's interesting is everybody was so excited about DeAndre Swift, Jameson Williams, T.J. Hawkinson, DeAndre Swift, and now you trade away Hawkinson to get some draft capital, and you go in another direction. So it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out.
Yeah, it is, because I'll tell you what, Hawkinson didn't look like he needed much time to get acclimated with the Minnesota offense. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Let's move on over to the Chicago Bears offense. They're scoring 20.8. We don't need to go over the season stats. Let's go straight to the last 3 games, because that's where you've seen an uptick in the
Yeah,
offense. And they're scoring 31.3 points per game the last 3 games. They're not throwing for much, and only 131.3 yards, but they're rushing for 245 yards a game. Defensively for Detroit, giving up 29.3 points a game, 32 worst, 268.5 passing yards, 148 yards rushing. Uh, Coach, I love to see this, but every week in and out, and you got a must start in Justin Fields. He's scoring 31.3 points per game in the last 3 games, not doing much as far as yards in the air. However, when you can rush for 175 yards and you still throw for 3 touchdowns, the guy is just comfortable in that offense, and whatever they're doing, they're utilizing his talents. Justin Fields looks damn good right now. Moving on, I feel comfortable, very much like the Detroit offense. The Chicago Bears offense has an offense where you should feel comfortable if you got to start 2 of their backs, and they're David Montgomery and Khalil Herbert.
Yep.
Until otherwise, either one of those guys, I have them on my roster. I'm starting either one of them. The rest of it, we've already looked at the fact that they're only, throwing for 131.3 passing yards a game, which means if I have a player on that team in the passing game, I'm probably not starting. And I don't care if it's Mooney, Claypool, or Kmet. If I were to play one of them, I like Kmet this week. Coach, tell us about the Chicago offense and your thoughts.
Yeah, I think you talk a little bit about Justin Fields and what he's done over the last few games. Their scoring being up at 31 points a game, a long way from where they were with Matt Nagy last year. And these last 3 games, these are against Miami, Dallas, and New England Patriots. Those are 3 games in the playoff hunt right now. And these are defenses that are not, bottom tier defenses. So these guys are playing really, really well against good defenses. So it's exciting for anybody who believed in Justin Fields. If you drafted Justin Fields, you spent draft capital on him, you were able to buy him for cheap over the last year, you're certainly getting that return on investment right now.
Absolutely. And more so than anything, just feeling good about the kid. I mean, the kid has
Yeah.
gone through, you talk about being drafted in not an ideal situation. He seems to be a hell of a lot more comfortable now. Let's move on to the next game. Cleveland Browns 3-5 at the Miami Dolphins 6-3. Coach, break down the Cleveland offense for us.
Yeah, so they're at 22.3 points per game, 249 yards passing, and 118 yards on the ground over the last 3. So you're starting to see what's interesting is they dominated in the run game early in the season. They're 3rd in the NFL in terms of season long, 164 yards per game. But over the last 3, just 118, as they've got a little bit of the passing game going with Amari Cooper and Jacoby Brissett. You're starting to see that kind of tick. Donovan Peoples-Jones has been very consistent over the last 4 or 5 games. So defensively for Miami, the points per game is about the same over the last 3. They're giving up 23 points per game. The passing yards, 224 yards, but they're giving up 143 yards on the ground. So again, Cleveland's been a little bit more focused on the passing game, not as explosive in the run game over the last 3. But now you face a Miami defense that's giving up a lot of yards on the ground. So my starts are Nick Chubb. Again, Miami giving up 143 yards per game over the last 3. He's averaging 19.9 touches and 114 yards per game with 10 touchdowns on the ground at the midway point. He's only got 1 game with under 87 yards rushing this season, and that's week 6 against Baltimore when he had 56. So you're firing up Nick Chubb, and you're firing up Amari Cooper. 27.3% target share this season, which is 14th in the NFL. He's 9th in targets per route run. And Miami has given up a touchdown to the wide receiver position 6 out of 9 games. And Mari's got 5 touchdowns through 8, pacing for a career high 11 on the year. So I'm starting Amari Cooper. As far as hits go, this is not a surprise to anybody. David Bell can't figure out what his role is. They run a lot of two backs, 12 and 21 personnel, a little bit more than most other teams. So I don't like David Bell. Obviously, Harrison Bryant is a guy now with Njoku out. He's not a must sit, but I think there's better options out there for you. And if you have those, you're not starting Harrison Bryant. He had an opportunity last week with Njoku out and absolutely nothing with it. He's just not as explosive in terms of an athletic standpoint after the catch that David Njoku is. So I'm not big on Harrison Bryant this week. Jacoby Brissett is playing well. He's not a must start, but again, with the guys and the quarterbacks that are out this week, maybe he's a guy that you play depending on your roster. You could see Kareem Hunt get a little bit more involved in the passing game this week. I think what's surprising, he's averaging a career low 4 yards per carry, but he does get a nice matchup this week. And he has seen 3 or more targets in 5 out of 8 games. And Miami defense does give up the 9th most receptions and 4th highest yards per reception to the running back position. So there is an opportunity there for Kareem Hunt. We haven't seen the return on investment we would have liked this year, but there is a chance there. This is that game that pays off. And then I've got Donovan Peoples-Jones. He's wide receiver 39 on Fantasy Pros for week 10. He's 70-plus yards receiving and 4 more receptions in 4 of the last 5 games. He's getting a 95% snap share over those 2 games. I think he's a clear wide receiver 2 in this offense. He's been consistent, so he's a sleeper pick for me. If you've got him, I would put him in your lineup. What do you think about Cleveland, Miami? Cleveland
Well,
offense.
a couple things. First one, Amari Cooper.
Yeah.
I saw an interesting stat. You can share it with us, but are you afraid of playing him with him being on the road? Because his performances on the home, his performances at home versus road, they're pretty dramatic.
Yeah, and I am, and it's simply because of who they have offensively, right? You have David Njoku out. I think Donovan Peoples-Jones has certainly stepped up. They don't have a great wide receiver 3 option in that offense. So I feel like with Amari Cooper, even though his road and home splits are not great, I do feel like because of who the surrounding talent is around him, there's still an opportunity for him this week to still be fantasy relevant. They're obviously pushing him as a wide receiver 1. And I think the difference too is in Dallas, you saw some of that same thing, but Kellen Moore is not a guy that necessarily schemes wide receiver 1s as well as some of the other offensive coordinators that you see out there.
Can
And I
we
think
get him to? Because I
I think
really need CeeDee
Cleveland's doing
Lamb to
that.
become a. I
Yeah,
need more from CeeDee Lamb. All right, before we
we
move
both
on, one
do.
more interesting thing about that offense before you tell us about Miami. And that's last week. Saw an interview with Derrick Henry, and Derrick Henry was asked, "How is the greatest running back in the NFL doing?" And he simply said, "I don't know. You should probably ask Nick Chubb." So with that
Pretty
being said,
awesome.
you gotta love Nick Chubb. All right, Miami Dolphins. Why don't you break that one down for us, Coach?
Yeah, so Miami over the last 3 games offensively, they actually increased their scoring output. They're 23 points a game on the season, but 27 over the last 3. Now that Tua Tagovailoa is healthy and back, they're averaging over almost 311 yards passing in his last 3 games, with just 98 yards on the ground. Cleveland defensively on the other side is 15th against the pass. They're giving up 208 yards on the season, and they're giving up 123 on the ground. However, I've been tougher against the run with only 98 yards per game over the last 3. But again, not Miami's strength. They're going to air it out. The Cleveland defense is mid-tier in terms of defending the passing game. So this is clear. Tua Tagovailoa, Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, they're all starting. I can go through all the metrics. I can go through how well they're playing. I don't need to do that. Everybody knows those are must starts if you have them. I'm sitting Mike Gesicki. Just six targets and 4 receptions with 41 yards over the last 2 games. He has gotten in the end zone. But since week 5, he's just a 12.8% target share and 1.33 yards per route run, which is not great. And Cleveland only gives up 5.4 fantasy points per game to tight ends with the second lowest catch rate. So I'm out on Mike Gesicki. I'm out on Trent Sherfield. There's not really a point for a wide receiver 3 in this offense, whether it's Cedric Wilson, Trent Sherfield. They're not going to target him very often, so there's no need to do that. I think the interesting part too is Jeff Wilson and Raheem Mostert. If you've got those 2 backs, I think everybody felt like, hey, Jeff Wilson's familiar with Mike McDaniel's offense. Mike McDaniel. It's funny when you say Mike McDaniel, Mike or Josh McDaniels, right? Mike McDaniel's offense, what he ran in San Francisco, what they're doing in Miami, it was not too surprising Jeff Wilson was able to plug right in. I think it was surprising is he out-touched Raheem Mostert 12-9 in that game and got the red zone touches. So it looks like Jeff Wilson is really the RB1 in that offense. He's ranked 25th on Fantasy Pros this week versus Raheem Mostert at RB30. So if you have Jeff Wilson like I do on several leagues, I'm playing Jeff Wilson.
We've already talked about how they're so efficient throwing the ball, and not just efficient, man. They are putting up big numbers throwing the ball. And with that being said, I think the trade for Jeff Wilson was in an effort to try and get a little more balance in that offense.
Yeah.
So I kind of expect to see those rushing totals to uptick over the next few weeks with both Wilson and Mostert. Let's move on to the next game. Denver Broncos 3-5 at the Tennessee Titans 5-3. Denver Broncos offense is averaging a dismal 15.1 points per game. It's not any better these last 3 games, although now it's 15.3. They're throwing for 220.5 and rushing for 108.4. Tennessee's defense, 19.8 points per game, 275.6 passing yards a game, and 87.6 rushing yards. Out for Denver is their slot guy, KJ Hamler. And starts him for this one. Starts as much as he's getting beat up on Twitter, and for a lot of good reasons, whatever it may be. Russell Wilson. I feel comfortable starting Russell Wilson. We've already talked about the passing defense of Tennessee being the 30th in the NFL. I like Russell Wilson, and I really like the UCLA tight end, Greg Dulcich. He's really stepped up. He's kind of made Albert O insignificant. I don't know if it's him who did it or Albert O on his own doing that. But nevertheless, Greg Dulcich is looked like a guy that you should be very happy if you roster him in dynasty leagues. Sits pretty much, man. Unless I have to, I don't feel comfortable starting Jerry Jeudy or Cortland Sutton, even though you probably have to, looking at buys and looking at the fact that you probably invested some pretty good draft capital to acquire those two. But I'm not starting either one of the running backs. If I had to, I have a good feeling about Murray getting a good workload today. But aside from that, that's about all I got for the Denver offense, Coach. What about you? You're muted, Coach. Coach is muted.
Rookie mistake, man. The rookie mistake. No, I think what's interesting about the Russell Wilson take too is, you start Russell Wilson as QB 17 going to week 10. But then you got to figure out, if I've got Jerry Jeudy or Cortland Sutton, am I confident playing those guys? And if I am, which one of them is the guy that's going to be the lead guy? Early in the season, it was Cortland Sutton, which I thought made sense for Russell Wilson's skill set. Attacking teams vertically outside the numbers is what he did well in Seattle. But lately, it's been Jerry Jeudy. So I'm with you. If I've got better options, I'm starting those other guys. I'm not starting Jerry Jeudy or Cortland Sutton because I don't want to have to pick between the two. Melvin Gordon, Latavius Murray, look their age on the ground. I mean, it's 3 to 4 yards on a cloud of dust. So yeah, I agree with you 100%. I love Greg Dulcich. You were able to get him late third, early fourth in rookie drafts, sometimes even later than that, and he has paid off. I've got a ton of shares of him, so excited to see what he's doing. I think he's got tight end one upside every week for the rest of the season.
All right, hey, let's move on to the other side of the ball with the Tennessee Titans offense. The Tennessee offense is averaging 18.6 points per game, 136 yards passing per game. We talked about, remember early on, how we just made a joke of the Chicago offense and their inability to throw the ball, and how teams that we coach at the high school level threw for a hell of a lot more yards. What these guys doing at the NFL? Here's another offense that just looks very pedestrian in the passing game. Rushing 142 yards, but over the last 3 games, and a lot of that was because Malik Willis started, but they were rushing for over 208 yards a game in the last 3 games. That's pretty freaking impressive. Defensively, Denver is one of the top units in the league. They're giving up 16.5 points per game, which is second in the NFL, giving up 165.8 passing yards per game, which is first in the NFL. And their rushing defense gives up 122.6, 21st in the NFL. Looking at where the Denver defense is good, and that's in the passing game, you got to feel confident. Derrick Henry, that guy is just a workhorse. 200 yards rushing versus the Houston Texans. So obviously he is a must start. If they're not Derrick Henry, I'm sitting them. I'm not playing Ryan Tannehill in his first game back. If anything were to happen, I'm not excited about Malik Willis. I'm not excited about anybody on their offensive side. I am excited to see Treylon Burke back in the offense, but I'm not starting this week. Coach, what about you? I know you got a sleeper for this game.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I think Derrick Henry is your start, right? And I think in the passing game, Denver has a top-ranked pass defense in the NFL, and you've got Patrick Surtain and those guys, and they've got a great secondary, and they can create some pressure up front. So I don't like anybody in the passing game there either, based on what we've seen historically. And then, Treylon Burks is back. I think everybody's, he was the guy, coming out of Arkansas that was a guy that could catch the ball and have an opportunity to take it to the house every time he touched the ball. So excited to see what they do with Treylon Burks. But again, because the passing game has been so bad as of late, and not just talking about Malik Willis, you can go back to Ryan Tannehill starts and say the same thing. So I'm not there in terms of starting Treylon Burks yet, but certainly a guy I'm keeping an eye on. But from a sleeper perspective, I like Chiggy Okonkwo this week. I think he's a guy that has an opportunity to be relevant in the passing game. I think he's a guy that can work the middle of the field. He's athletic. He can give you yards after the catch. We saw that in a previous game. He took a intermediate catch and took it to the house. So I like Chiggy this week as my sleeper pick.
Chiggy. All right, hey, let's move on. Let's move on. Big game. Before we get into the matchups, let's talk about an injury concern and that's Minnesota Vikings 7-1 at Buffalo Bills 6-2. In last week's loss to the Jets, Josh Allen suffered what seems to be a UCL sprain. All week long, there was talk about him playing or not playing. It looks like he is going to play. And, being a former high school football coach, and both of us, for me, I don't know. I don't think I would be playing him. And I realize that I'm no doctor and I'm certainly not a head NFL coach. But when you have the aspirations they do, I think they were your Super Bowl pick.
Yeah.
I think a Week 10 game is fine to sit your franchise quarterback, but they're choosing not to do that. Let's get into the Minnesota Vikings. Minnesota Vikings offensively are scoring 24.1 points per game, throwing for 238 and rushing for 102. Defensively, Buffalo is one of the best in the league, giving up only 14.8 points per game, giving up 194.8 passing yards a game and 104.9 rushing yards. My start and sits for this one, we're going to start off with Justin Jefferson and TJ Hawkinson. Justin Jefferson, first and foremost, he's my wide receiver one. There was a lot of talk coming into the season. Is it Chase or is it Jefferson? I think the consistency and his ability to stay on the field makes Jefferson my wide receiver one in Dynasty. And that guy is just so smooth, and he's going to get such a big paycheck here in the next year or two. And then TJ Hawkinson comes right over from Detroit last week, 2 games before the game. He gets his first practice, and he only gets 9 targets and has 9 receptions for 90 yards. And look for him to get even more going forward. Dalvin Cook's a must start because he's Dalvin Cook. And I'd also feel pretty comfortable playing Kirk Cousins. Sitting, I'm not playing KJ Osborne, and I'm not playing Adam Thielen. Adam Thielen last week with TJ Hawkinson in the offense had his lowest output in receptions with only 3. There's only one ball, and if you got guys like Jefferson, Cook, and now what it looks like they want to do with Hawkinson, some people are going to suffer. And unfortunately, I think that's going to be Adam Thielen who suffers the most. Coach, your thoughts on the offense?
Yeah, I agree with you. I think, Dalvin Cook's a must start. Justin Jefferson is Justin Jefferson. And you touched on TJ Hawkinson. And I think this is where we felt like with the Kevin O'Connell offense and how he used Tyler Higbee when he was with the Rams. You saw him integrate TJ Hawkinson that offense last week, and 9 targets, 9 grabs for 70 yards. He's a guy that's a great addition, I think, to this offense. Now, they are facing a Buffalo defense that is number 1 against tight ends, only 4.5 fantasy points per game with tight ends. But I think the difference is what you have outside with Justin Jefferson, what you can do with Adam Thielen in the red zone, although his production is down this year, and then KJ Osborne. I think there's enough weapons around TJ Hawkinson that makes it a little bit more difficult to focus on him as a weapon, and they utilize him in the screen game the way that Kevin O'Connell likes to. So I think TJ Hawkins is certainly a safe play here. So I'm with you there, man. Love it.
All right, hey, let's move on to say that again. I'm sorry, go ahead, Coach.
You want to get to Trey's question real quick?
Yeah, we can do
On the
that.
Buffalo side of the ball?
Yeah, let's do that. And I'll go ahead and go first, but then you give your opinion. We don't always have to agree on this. And for
That's
me,
right.
we've got Keenan Allen out. We've got Michael Williams out, and we are coming off a game where Josh Palmer cracked the century mark with 100 yards receiving, and is for the first time in his career. He's a second-round pick out of Tennessee a year ago. I like him, and I feel comfortable with the injuries to the guys that we just mentioned in playing him. We know that we don't always know if it's going to be Judy, if it's going to be Sutton. And so for me, it's Palmer for me, Coach. What about you?
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. It's Josh Palmer for me too, and I don't think this is particularly close. I think just because you have to predict between Dulcich and Sutton and Judy who's going to be the guy that's going to be schemed this week in that offense, and not trusting Nathaniel Hackett and Russell Wilson enough to make that decision right now. I'm going with Josh Palmer, who to me is a clear wide receiver 1 for the Chargers right now, with both Keenan Allen and Mike Williams out. He's the guy, and then you have DeAndre Carter, and you can siphon down from there. But yeah, Josh Palmer to me is a clear start in this one. Trey, great question, man. Appreciate you.
Hey, my question for Trey, I see Trey S. is you wouldn't have to be Trey Sermon, are you? I know you've had a lot of inactives, and now you're getting pretty heavily involved in fantasy football. Hey, let's move on. Again, thanks a lot, Trey. Appreciate it. Send questions anytime. Moving on to the Buffalo offense. They're averaging 27.5 points per game, which is third in the NFL. 292 yards passing a game, again, third in the NFL, and 124.3 yards rushing for 13. Defensively for Minnesota, 20.1 points per game, 12th in the NFL, 256.9 passing yards, and 111 yards rushing. We thought Josh Allen was probably going to have an out designation. He does not. So it looks like he's good to go. And injury or not, this could just mean if his arm is not exactly healthy. We already know what he can do on the ground. So I'm starting Josh Allen. I'm not worried about him if he's in the game. And I'm starting Stephon Diggs. Sitting, we don't know what – Nyheim Hines did not really pop last week in his first game with the team, but his presence just makes James Cook not someone that I feel comfortable starting. So I'm sitting him. Other guys that I'm sitting for this offense, I'm not starting I'm not starting Singletary. And as much as I would like to start Gabe Davis with his 25.3 yards per catch, just his inability to be consistent week in or week out makes it difficult for me to start him. I know any opportunity I could during the offseason, if I could trade him with all the talk about how he was going to be, I did it because he's always kind of been a all or nothing type of guy. What about you, Coach? What are your thoughts on this offense and as it relates to fantasy?
Yeah, I mean, I think what's going to be interesting is with Josh Allen, right, with the UCL injury. But I think this is a game that Josh Allen is going to focus on the short to intermediate. I think if I'm an OC here, I'm looking at, hey, let's get the ball out of his hands quick. Let's eliminate, a situation where he has to stretch the field vertically and put any type of, undue pressure on that UCL injury, which can be a very sensitive injury for a quarterback. Little surprise. We talked about real football versus fantasy and what we would do as coaches with Josh Allen. I think both of us agree that we would sit him even in a great matchup. It's about winning a Super Bowl and being there at the end of the season, but he's going to play. So as long as he's playing, you're firing up Stephon Diggs. So yeah, I agree with you. I think a sleeper pick for me is Nyheim Hines. He's a wide receiver 47 on Fantasy Pros going in this week. Just a 6% snap share last week in his debut. He only had a few days of practice, so I think now with a full week, I think in them wanting to, I think, utilize the dink and dunk a little bit more this week for Josh Allen. I think this could be a game Nyheim Hines pays off with 5 or 6 grabs and could find the end zone.
Well, there you go. Let's move on to the next one. Houston Texans 1-6-1 at the New York Giants 6-2. Houston offense, they're averaging 16.6 points per game, 28th in the NFL. 188 yards passing, which is 26th in the NFL, with 101.9 yards rushing, 25th in the NFL. Giants defense, 19.6 points per game, 208 yards passing, with 137 yards given up on the ground. Starts, there's really only one start from here on out for me in this offense, and that's Dameon Pierce. This is a guy, we talked about him in the past. The guy just runs angry. He is certainly looks like he's going to be a running back one over the next few years. You're sitting anyone in the passing attack. In fact, for me, you're sitting everybody who has a Texan jersey on that does not have,
including Brandon Cooks.
Correct, including Brandon Cooks. And It's just unfortunate. He's such a consummate pro. I mean, I think he's got 6 straight 1,000 yards receiving. But unfortunately, he's just stuck in an offense that, frankly, has a third-round quarterback, Davis Mills, leading the way in it. Coach, what are your thoughts on this offense?
Yeah, I'm with you. I mean, Dameon Pierce runs like he's pissed off at everybody. We talked about that before the show. I mean, love watching him run, especially between the tackles. Love his physicality. Always seems to fall forward. Great contact balance. We talked about this on past shows. We just felt like he wasn't utilized properly in that Florida offense with Muschamp, but you're starting to see him at the NFL level be utilized and have great. So volume upside alone, he's a play this week. So love Dameon Pierce, but yeah, that's the only guy on this offense that I'm playing, and that includes Brandon Cooks, unfortunately, with what's going on there. So I'm
all right, let's
100%.
move on to the New York Giants offense. Offensively, they're scoring 20.4 points per game, 159 yards passing. Another team that struggles throwing the ball, 161 yards rushing, 5th in the NFL. Defensively for Houston, they're giving up 22.9 points per game. They're giving up 217.5 yards passing a game, and they're giving up an awful 180.6 yards rushing, which is 32nd in the NFL. Out for Giants, one of my favorite rookies, unfortunately, Daniel Bellinger, still suffering from the eye injury. He, early on after the injury was suffered, they talked about him might be out for the year, but it looks like he could come back. Starts for this game, I like Daniel Jones. I like Daniel Jones, both with, I feel like he's going to get you a passing touchdown or two, but I also think his ability to run the ball, especially in a defense that struggles against the run, I feel comfortable playing him. And then if you're going to face the 32nd rush defense, it's pretty neat problem to have when you have Saquon Barkley back there. So
Yeah.
Saquon Barkley is a lot of people's RB1 for this week heading into the game. I'm sitting pretty much everyone in the passing attack for the New York Giants. There is good news for them, and it could be bad news depending on how you look at it with the way he played. But Kenny Golladay is back this week. And I'll tell you, if you've watched some of the interviews with him over the last few weeks, and he really seemed early on in the season like he was a malcontent. He wasn't happy with playing time. And the next thing you know, he's sitting out game after game because of injuries. But a lot of people were thinking they were sitting out games because of his attitude.
Yeah.
But if you've watched him over the last few weeks, he seems to be someone who's bought into the system. And now he's healthy. And now we get to see what he can do. I still wouldn't play him. But if I had a sleeper, I would put Golladay in that sleeper just because I like the change in his attitude. What about you in this one game or this?
Yeah, I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head. Daniel Jones has played well in a Brian Daboll offense. They've been able to utilize his legs a little bit more. Saquon Barkley's a home run smash every week. I don't care who you're playing. And from the passing attack with Daniel Bellinger out, that's a guy I probably would have said, hey, I like Daniel Bellinger, but unfortunately with the socket, he's not able to play. But in the receiver room, you got Golladay, you got David Sills, you got Marcus Johnson, you got Wan'Dale Robinson, you got Darius Slayton, it just goes on and on and on, right? It's it's just not, it's not good. I do have a deep. I mean, I dove deep on the sleeper with this one. I at tight end 37, which if you know the tight end position, if you're ranked 37th, you might as well rank 150 if you played wide receiver. But Tanner Hudson, I just feel like he finds a way to slip, to find himself open on either a pop pass or in the red zone to get a touchdown this week and has some fantasy relevance. So there's your deep dive sleeper pick right there.
As a former editor with Ball Blast Football, they would call that a ballsy take. So I like it, Coach. Let's move on to the next one. Jacksonville Jaguars 3-6 at the Kansas City Chiefs 6-2. Coach, why don't you give us a breakdown of the Jacksonville offense?
Yeah, so Jacksonville's offense is not really been much different, right? Season long, they're 222 points per game. If you look at the last three, which I like to look at to find out how are teams playing right now at this point in the season in the current state, and they're 20.3 points per game. The passing defense is 17th. It's been that way all year long. It's been that way over the last 3 weeks, but they give up 167 yards on the ground. Or they run for 167 yards on the ground. So we've seen Travis Etienne really explode and kind of show, especially now with James Robinson now no longer in that backfield. From Kansas City, from a defensive perspective, they're 20th in points per game allowed at 23.6. They're 24th against the pass at 249. And they've given up over the last 3 weeks 132.7 yards per game. So they have not defended the run well over the last several weeks. So we talk about, again, who we're starting, Travis Etienne. 42 carries, 264 yards, and 3 scores just in the last 2 weeks. He's got 3 consecutive weeks over 100 yards rushing and 5 straight with over 70 yards on the ground. And KC has given up, again, 132 yards per game on the ground. So I like him. I like Christian Kirk as the clear wide receiver one in this offense. The Chiefs allow the 6th most fantasy points per game to slot receivers. He's got a good matchup in the slot. He's finished in the top 20 in 2 of the last 3 games with 11 red zone targets and a 24% target share on the season. So those are 2 guys, Travis Etienne and Christian Kirk, that we like this week. As far as sits, I'm sitting JaMychal Hasty, just a 20% snap share over the last 2 games, 7 carries for 19 yards. Just not a lot of opportunity. Etienne's getting 90% of the snap share. I mean, he is that offense. He's not coming off the field unless he's injured or needs a breather real quick, right? So you're not starting anybody outside of Etienne in that backfield. Then Marvin Jones Jr., I think we talk about it every week. I probably need to stop putting him in the sit. I think it just be known that you're not playing Marvin Jones. So I think if you look at the tweeners, you've got Trevor Lawrence, Zay Jones, and Evan Ingram. I did pick Evan Ingram as a smash play. A couple weeks ago, I was a week off. I think it was a week prior to that he had a pretty good game. But the Chiefs are 28th in fantasy points per game against tight end, giving up 14.1. So if you have an Evan Ingram, you're probably putting him in your lineup. What do you think, Coach, about this matchup?
Just talking about Travis Etienne, every time we get a nice looking young running back, something happens. So all I want to do is continue to see him coming back week in and week out because he has shown now that he has taken over that backfield that he is a RB1 in the making. I love what he can do in the passing game. Just fire up Travis Etienne anytime from here on out. Love the dude. Why don't we move on to Kansas City's offense, Coach?
Yeah, so Kansas City, McCole Hardman is out, so we'll get into that, what that means for this offense. But shoot, hey, they're averaging 30 points a game on the season. That's number one in the NFL. They're 386 yards passing per game in the last 3 games and over 311 on the season. So they're absolutely dialed in. Patrick Mahomes is Patrick Mahomes. Andy Reid is scheming guys open and doing a fantastic job. They're only averaging 85.7 rushing yards per game over the last 3. But again, you're not going to average 150 yards rushing when you're throwing for almost 400 yards a game. And the Jacksonville defense, I mean, they're 22nd against the pass. So that's all I need to know about this matchup, right? So this is a game on paper based on analytics and advanced metrics that Kansas City should be able to throw the ball over the field. So you're starting Patrick Mahomes, 43 of 68 last week. He threw the ball 68 times for 446 yards and a touchdown against Tennessee. And over the last 4 weeks, he's thrown for 292, 338, 423, and 446 against the Raiders, Buffalo, one of the top passing defenses in the NFL, San Francisco, pretty darn good defensively, and Tennessee. And he's thrown 10 touchdowns to 4 interceptions in those games. And you've seen him target Juju Smith and Travis Kelce in those 2 games, have been targeted 60 times over the last 3 games. So he's figured out. We knew about Kelce, who was going to be that wide receiver one. I think a lot of us knew it should be Juju based on what he did in Pittsburgh. He's become that clear wide receiver one, is wide receiver 15 this week. So you're starting him. Travis Kelce, overall tight end one again. The guy just doesn't seem to age. He's got a 25% target share. And Jacksonville is 32nd in DVOA against tight ends. So they do not play well against tight ends. So Kelsey's a smash. As far as sits go for Kansas City, I'm not touching that backfield. It's crowded. Pick your poison or don't. If Jack McKinnon is out, you could bump Clyde Edwards-Helaire and Isaiah Pacheco to guys that, hey, if you have to start him, you could. But if all 3 of those guys are playing, I get Edwards-Helaire and Pacheco are splitting the early down work. Jack McKinnon's become the passing game guy, but I'm not confident starting anybody in that backfield. And Marquez Valdez-Scantling going to get an opportunity for more reps this week with Cole Hardman out, but just a 6% target share since week 6. Don't feel good about him. I do think that this could be the chance for Sky Moore to have his breakout game. He's played 40 snaps over the last 2 games, but just 2 targets and no receptions. But again, this is a guy with Sky Moore. And I went back and forth. You could throw Sky Moore in as a sleeper pick this week. You could throw Kadarius Toney in as a sleeper pick this week. They're wide receiver 62 for Kadarius Toney, wide receiver 82 for Sky Moore. One of those 2 guys is going to be relevant this week. Is trying to figure out which one that is. What are your
For
thoughts?
me, I agree with everything you said. But my ears really perked up when you brought up Sky Moore. You talk about a guy who had everything coming into the draft as far as, he had the breakout age, he had the analytics that you love to see, and he had the production all 3 years while he played at Central Michigan. I like him, and I think this is when we see his breakout. At least that's what I'm hoping for. So Sky Moore certainly my sleeper in this game. All right, hey, let's move on. New Orleans Saints 3-6 at Pittsburgh Steelers 2-6. New Orleans Saints offense is averaging 23.6 points per game, 11th in the NFL, 246.7 passing yards, 7th, and 130 yards rushing, 12th in the NFL. Defensively for Pittsburgh, 24.6 points a game scored against, 273 yards, which is 31st in the NFL, 117 yards rushing, 16th. Out for New Orleans is Mark Ingram. People that I feel comfortable starting. We just talked about the Pittsburgh defense giving up 273 yards passing. So I'm comfortable starting Andy Dalton. And Alvin Kamara, that is a guy that I expect a big game out of Alvin Kamara today. I think Alvin Kamara is probably going to be a top 3 running back for the week when all things are said and done. And the wide receivers, Chris Olave, there's a guy that you were getting late in rookie drafts, late in the first round, sometimes middle first, but regardless, you got to love what you're seeing out of that kid out of Ohio State. And you know what? Taysom Hill and his ability to give you points in the rushing game and sometimes give you points as a thrower. I'm starting him at the tight end spot. Sitting, I'm sitting Dwayne Washington, Traquan Smith. Coach, what are your thoughts on this offense?
Yeah, I'm with you. And hey, just a worthy note here from terms of Pittsburgh defensively, you get TJ Watt back this week, which is a huge plus there. But how much of a fantasy impact does that have? I think that just depends on if he can get home and get to Andy Dalton. But yeah, I like the way Andy Dalton's been playing, and I like the way that Chris Olave is playing. I was trying to set up a trade this morning. I don't remember all the details, but I was trying to get Chris traded away Chris Godwin for Chris Olave, and then there was some draft picks involved. We couldn't get the draft picks to work out, but I'm a huge Chris Olave guy. I think what's interesting too that Taysom Hill, right? Is he a guy you're playing? If you look at all the metrics from a receiving standpoint, he's one of the last place guys in the NFL at the tight end position. Now that's obviously because he plays in the Wildcat, he plays running back, he plays all over the offense. But I think Taysom Hill is still a guy that has tight end one upside if he can get the volume and get in the end zone. So I like him in this game too. But yeah, I mean, and sleeper, I got Jarvis Landry. Jarvis Landry's back this week. He's wide receiver 67 on the week because he's been nursing an injury. But I do like Jarvis Landry as a sleeper pick this week in that offense.
I'll tell you what, early on, man, that guy looked good. He was getting a hell of a
He
lot of
did.
targets, and it's unfortunate. He's over the last few years struggled with injury, but when he's in there, the guy produces. All right, hey, let's move on to Pittsburgh and their offense, which isn't great. They're averaging 15 points a game, 31st in the NFL, passing for 204 and rushing for 94. Defensively for New Orleans, 25 2.5 points a game. For 28th in the NFL, 199.7 passing yards a game, 9th in the NFL, and 120.9 rushing yards. Nobody out for them. Starts. The only guy I'm comfortable starting in this game would be Pat Freiermuth. Sitting Kenny Pickett, sitting Najee Harris, sitting anybody else. Others, though, we're looking at Deontay Johnson and George Pickens. And what we're looking at with them is, can Deontay Johnson kind of establish any type of rapport with Kenny Pickett going forward? He's just too damn talented. This is a guy that's always been a PPR monster. You'd like to see that happen pretty soon, and hopefully it does today. And George Pickens, he's looked like the favorite target of Kenny for most of it. You have a sleeper in this, and I'll tell you, I'm really excited about this guy. And all week long, there were even talks about him taking over the starting position. So why don't you talk about your sleeper in this one, Coach?
Yeah, I like Jalen Warren in this one. You look at, I wrote an article for Project 32. We talked about Najee Harris in the offseason and him being kind of like a Zeke Elliott, entering this season where if he's getting the high volume, there's an opportunity for Najee Harris to be relevant, but he was not very efficient as a runner last year. I get the offensive line is not great, but now we're seeing Najee Harris is not getting the volume he was getting last year, and he's even less efficient than he was last year. So I think that opens the door for a guy like Jalen Warren, who can give you a little bit more explosiveness. So again, I feel like this is Tony Pollard, Zeke Elliott, right? And I feel like Jalen Warren is that Tony Pollard guy that's going to give you more explosiveness in that offense. He's a guy that can make people miss a little bit more than Najee Harris can. He just doesn't run, and he runs for a guy that's not as big as a Najee Harris. I still like the way this guy runs. So I've got Jalen Warren as a guy that's a sleeper pick this week in this matchup.
I love the way he runs. I love the guy does not give up on a play, and he's doing great out of the backfield. He looks a lot like James Conner. Maybe it's just because he's got the same number on, but I like Jalen Warren. I'm excited about him. See what we can do this week. Moving on to the next game, Indianapolis Colts with Jeff Saturday's first game. They're 3-5-1, and they're at the struggling Las Vegas Raiders 2-6. Tell us about this Indianapolis Colts offense, Coach.
Yeah, I mean, I tell you what, Jeff Saturday, man, talk about a guy that fires you up. But if this decision had been made in the offseason like it was with Dan Campbell in Detroit, it's just kind of what this reminds me of. Not a lot of coaching experience, although I know Campbell has some coaching experience. But what I mean by that is not a guy whose name was thrown around like completely unexpected. Everybody talking about this being completely full tank mode. And of course, Saturday came out in the press conference, and if that guy doesn't fire you up, first of all, I love watching him in the morning on NFL Network and the shows that he's on, and just love it when he talks. It should say on ESPN. I think he's on Get Up in the morning. But moving on, if they played the games on Saturday, I might give them a little bit more of a chance, but they don't. They play on Sunday, so Jeff Saturday doesn't have as much relevancy. But Indianapolis Colts offense is 32nd in scoring at 14.7. Over the last 3 games, they're averaging 9.7. Sam Ellinger has not worked out. They're only passing for 153 yards per game, which is a far cry from where they were with Matt Ryan. And they're at 92.7 yards rushing. However, they do get Jonathan Taylor back this week. He's the only guy in this offense that I am starting. The Raiders give up 20.2 fantasy points per game to running backs and allow 137 yards on the ground over the last 3 games. So you're firing up Jonathan Taylor. He's the only offensive weapon that I think is relevant at this point. I think that Sam Ellinger has completely killed Michael Pittman's value. He's killed Alec Pierce's value. He's killed Paris Campbell's value. So it's tough because the offense looks so bad. So I'm sitting Ellinger. I'm sitting Zach Moss. There's no reason to believe that he makes an impact with Jonathan Taylor back. Jordan Wilkins, a little bit of passing game work. The Naheem Hines gone. Don't see it there. Paris Campbell. In Matt Ryan's last 2 starts, he had 23 targets for 17 grabs, 113 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Right? He was coming on. But in Sam Ellinger's starts, he has just 7 targets and 5 grabs for 58 yards and has not found the end zone. I mean, he's killed everybody off. I will say my sleeper pick in this game, after all that, all the bashing on Sam Ellinger in the passing game and how he's running his value down, Alec Pierce is a vertical threat in this offense. So you're hoping for a splash play touchdown. He does have a 14% target share in Ellinger's 2 starts. I think they hook up this week for a big one. And I think Alec Pierce finds his way, maybe a 50, 60-yard touchdown. This one, there's another deep dive sleeper for you. What are your thoughts on that?
My thoughts on that is I'm kind of curious to know what Indianapolis's goal is. And I say that because you saw this week after Saturday was hired that, if needed or if wanted, Matt Ryan would be available to him. And so I think the consensus when Ellinger started playing was that they're in full tank mode. Let's just take a quick look and see what we have in this kid. And if he's terrible, it's fine. We're going to be able to move up in the draft order. If he's not great, we might find our quarterback of the future. I think it's obvious they didn't find their quarterback of the future. So kind of just to see what they're going to do, and if we do see Matt Ryan again. Why don't we move on to the Las Vegas Raiders offense, Coach?
Yeah, Raiders offense, last 3 games, 19 points a game, 209 yards through the air, and only 91.7 yards rushing, which is when you talk about how great Josh Jacobs has been, it just goes to show you what everybody else on offense is doing, which is really nothing. The Colts defense over the last 3 games, giving up 171 yards passing and 101.3 yards rushing. It's not a bad defense, right? You do have out Darren Waller this week with the hamstring, of course, Hunter Renfrow with the oblique. My starts in this game are Josh Jacobs. He's averaging 20 touches and 114 yards per game, while also maintaining 11% target share. He's being relevant in the passing game. He's got 19 red zone touches on the year. He's second in juke rate and first in evaded tackles. And the Colts' run defense is 20th in rushing yards allowed since week 4. So you're firing up Josh Jacobs. You're firing up Devontae Adams. And I'm not starting anybody outside of those 2 guys. I'm not starting Derek Carr, who's got just 1 game with at least 20 fantasy points this season. Colts give up the 3rd fewest passing yards per game over the last 6 weeks, and Carr is QB 21 on the season and has completed less than 60% of his passes for 2 consecutive weeks with just 360 passing yards. So if you're not Devontae Adams, I don't love you in the passing game. If you're not Josh Jacobs, I don't love you in the run game. So Amir Abdullah, Brandon Bolden, Zamir White, Keelan Cole Sr., you can name all the names. I'm not starting any of those guys. Foster Moreau could have a sneaky play this week, could have an opportunity. If you're going to try to get things going in the passing game, I think Mac Hollins, if I'm going to pick a sleeper in this game, for this team, it would be Mac Hollins, even though, because there's a chance that Stephon Gilmore shadows Devontae Adams this week. I think there's a real good chance that happens. I still think Devontae Adams can have a game, but if that's the case, and Mac Hollins has an opportunity in the intermediate to vertical passing game. I mean, he's finished top 33 times this season. So look for Mac Hollins as my sleeper in this one.
I like that kid. It's really interesting. You expected a lot out of guys like Hunter Renfrow. Now he's out, but Mac Hollins has played really well when given the opportunity.
Yeah.
Let's move on to the next game. Arizona Cardinals 3-6 at the Los Angeles Rams 3-5. Arizona Cardinals offense, they're scoring 22.6 points per game, 16th in the NFL, 220.7 passing yards a game, and 117 rushing. Defensively for the Rams, 21.6 points per game, 17th in the NFL, 214 yards passing, and 98.4 yards rushing. Starts for this game. On the surface, it looks like Kyler Murray's his must start, but I am a little bit concerned. He has had some issues the last few days with a hamstring issue. If he's fired up and ready to go, I'm playing him, but I would be a little bit worried about his rushing upside in this one with that issue. Despite the fact that he had a little scuffle with DeAndre Hopkins on the sideline last week, I'm still firing up DeAndre Hopkins and I'm firing up Zach Ertz. Sitting Robbie Anderson, sitting Greg Ortich, sitting AJ Green. We've talked about the landscape of the running back position all year long, and because of that, I'm playing James Conner. I'm not playing Benjamin, but I'm probably going to give Rondell Moore my first start. I think he has shown over the last few weeks that he is someone who can produce, and he's getting more time out of the slot. And he's someone that I'm comfortable starting. He's someone I'm excited about. How about you on this Arizona Cardinal offense?
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking even as of 45 minutes ago, Kyler Murray and Matt Stafford are still going to be, game time decisions. I think it's possible that both those guys don't play. However, obviously the Cardinals are in a must-win game. I mean, they just can't afford to continue to fall behind in the NFC West. Cliff Kingsbury's got his career on the line here, so I think if Kyler Murray can go, they're probably going to try to find a way to get him to go. But we've noticed with Kyler Murray, whether it's a shoulder, it's an ankle, it's whatever. If he's injured and he's playing, he does almost nothing in the run game. Right? He plays it
Right.
very cautious. He gets out of bounds. He slides. He gets out. He's trying not to run the football. So I do have some concerns with Kyler Murray, but I do think D Hop, Zach Ertz are must starts. And like you said, I love Rondell Moore. I love the talent. I think if you have James Conner, you're probably playing him. I don't like Benjamin just because James Conner being back. But outside of Kyler Murray, I'm with you 100%. I have some concerns. I'm not a big Kyler Murray guy anymore. I don't see the Konami code nearly as much. I think it's more about escaping. But even when he escapes the pocket, he's looking to throw the football before he's looking to run, and he just doesn't break off the long runs because he wants to duck out and get out of bounds and not get hit. So I just don't see that player we saw a couple years ago anymore.
All right, hey, let's move on to Los Angeles Rams offense, which has not been good this year. They're only scoring 16.4 points a game, passing for 217 and rushing for a dismal 68.4. Arizona on the defensive side has given up 26.8 points per game, 253 yards passing, and 115 yards rushing. You already mentioned that there may not be a Matthew Stafford, so
No.
that's even going to make it tougher for that offense. But starts, I don't care who you're playing. You've got Cooper Kupp in there, and you got Tyler Higbee. Sits, if Wolford is starting, you're not playing him. And as much as it breaks my heart because nobody was a bigger fan of Cam Akers than myself, but you can't play Cam Akers as it currently stands. You may never be able to play him again. We'll see. But others, if Matthew Stafford is in, you're probably having to play him just based off of where you got him in your drafts or traded for him. Gerald Henderson, yeah, I mean, if you need a running back, God, I wouldn't start anyone in the running back position for them, but I get it if you have to. What about you on this offense? And I know you have a sleeper for it.
What's interesting is the Cardinals give up 19.2 fantasy points per game to running backs, right? You think if this is a game for the running game to get going, this would be it. But they can't figure out if it's Darrell Henderson, if it's Cam Akers, if it's, now Kyron Williams is back and there's all the talk about, his combine scores and how bad his pro day was and how things weren't going to translate to the NFL level. So he slid down on the draft boards, but he's my deep sleeper on this one. He's wide receiver 63 coming into this week. So we're talking about, we're going wide receiver, running back six or seven this week. Outside the top 60 makes him a high end running back six, but he's got some receiving skills. 78 grabs for 675 yards and 4 touchdowns at Notre Dame, where he totaled over 2,000 yards rushing and had 27 touchdowns. So I think if Henderson and Akers have not done anything to take advantage of the opportunity to be the RB1 there, I think you at least have to take a look at Kyron Williams and see what you have. I don't know if that's this game or not, but there's going to come a game that Kyron Williams is going to get touches, and I'm going to go out on a limb and say he's my sleeper, and he's a guy that gets some relevancy this week.
All right, hey, let's move on to a game I'm sure you're excited about, and that's going to be the national televised game today at 125 on the West Coast, and that's Dallas Cowboys versus at 6-2 versus the struggling Green Bay Packers at 3-6. Why don't you? If anyone's going to break down the offense, it's got to be their biggest fan. So why don't you tell us about their offense, coach?
Yeah, over the last 3 games, this includes the last game that Cooper Rush played, but they've got 30 points per game. They're 204.7 yards passing, and that's going to be because that includes the last Cooper Rush game, and 157 yards on the ground. This team has just started to run the football. They look very, very good running the football over the last several weeks. Tyler Smith has looked great, and they moved him out to left tackle, and you're seeing guys that have played really well and filling in spots on that offensive line. Green Bay has given up 170 yards passing, which is second in the NFL. That is up to 184 of the last 3, and they give up a ton of yards on the ground. So what Dallas is doing well is run the football. What Green Bay does not defend well is the run. So this is a great matchup for Tony Pollard and Zeke Elliott. I'm starting Dak Prescott. I won't get a lot of the numbers, but in his 2 starts since returning from the thumb injury, he's 6th in PFF passing grade and 7th in yards per attempt. and the Packers have given up 2 touchdowns in each of the last 3 games through the air, and that's against Jared Goff, Josh Allen, and Taylor Heineke. So if you're giving up 2 touchdowns to Heineke and Goff, you're probably giving up 2 touchdowns to Dak Prescott in this one. Tony Pollard must start. We saw what he did last week, given an opportunity to start. It was 131 yards and 3 scores on the ground. If Zeke does play, knowing what happened last year with the PCL injury, just did not look great. I don't see him getting a lot of touches. I think it's more, hey, let's ease him back into it. Let's see how he feels. I still think hopefully this is a totally Pollard week. So I don't have Zeke as a must start, but I do have Tony Pollard as a must start based off of that. And of course, CeeDee Lamb, he's getting the volume. He's a 31.6% target share, which is third in the NFL. He's a wide receiver 16 coming this week. He should feast in the slot this week. Green Bay gives up 116.0 passer rating and a 78% catch rate against the slot this year. So if there's a game for CD to break out, this looks like it would be that game. So I'm sitting Michael Gallup, has not looked great coming back from the ACL injury. I'm sitting Noah Brown, who's at wide receiver 70, has not done much. If it's not the wide receiver 1, it's going to be the tight end or the running backs in this offense. Dalton Schultz is tight end 10. You can see him and Dak trying to get that chemistry. If you do have Dalton Schultz, he's probably in your lineup because again, there's tight end position only goes so deep. So I do have Jake Ferguson as a sleeper, not necessarily because of snaps. I feel like this is a game in the red zone. He gets an opportunity to get a touchdown in this game. So I've got Jake Ferguson as a sleeper. What are your thoughts on it?
My thoughts on it is Tony Pollard looks pretty good, and if they go
Yeah.
away from Zeke next year, I think they should be pretty comfortable. They're obviously going to draft a running back,
Yeah.
but I mean Tony Pollard. I saw a stat the other day. I think he's never had less than 20 fantasy points a game in games that he's started. So
Yeah.
anytime given the opportunity, that guy has performed. And quickly, I hope you're right. I hope they do get something going with Dalton Schultz because I need him because I have him on a bunch of teams. But let's move over to the other side of the ball. That's with the Green Bay Packer offense. What do you got there, Coach?
Yeah, we'll make this one quick. I mean, Green Bay's scoring 17 points a game. They're down to 15.7 over the last 3. 222 yards passing per game over the last 3, which is in line with where they've been all season long. And the rushing is 127 season long, 117 over the last 3. They're the same team in terms of the rushing attack. The Dallas defense, however, they have given up 20 points per game over the last 3, but only 16 over the course of the season, which is third in the NFL. They're ranked 4th against the pass. That number's come down even more. They're in the top 3 over the last 3 weeks, giving up only 152 yards through the air. But where they have struggled is they've given up 164 yards on the ground over the last 3 and ranked 24th in season long. So out is Romeo Doubs. As bad as that wide receiver core has been, they take another hit with Romeo being out. The only person I'm starting in this game is Aaron Jones. We touched on a little bit ago what Dallas has given up, 164 yards per game over the last 3 weeks. He did just have 11 touches for 45 yards last week in a 15-9 loss to the Lions. But in week 8 against Buffalo, he exploded for 143 yards on the ground. So I still think Aaron Jones is the running back to start there against a defense that struggled to stop the run. I'm not starting Aaron Rodgers. He's QB 22 on the season with just one top 12 finish all year. So unless you have to start him, Aaron Rodgers, which is crazy to say it, is not a guy that I think is a must start. Outside of Matthew Stafford in week 5, the Cowboys have not given up more than 228 yards passing to any quarterback. That includes Justin Fields, Jared Goff, Jalen Hurts, Carson Wentz, Daniel Jones, Joe Burrow, and Tom Brady. This team just does not give up yards through the air. So I'm not starting Rodgers, and for that matter, I'm not starting Robert Tonyan, Sammy Watkins, or Samari Torre. So there you go. Alan Lazard is the only guy that's got any starting relevancy, and I'm shying away from him if I can. But if I've got to start Alan Lazard on an offense, I'm okay starting him.
A little concerned about you brought up Aaron Jones being the only must start, but he did get banged up a little bit last week, and there were
Yeah.
talk about him possibly being out. But so we got to keep an eye on that. Before we move on to the next game, we've got a question. This is from Sheldon Bright. Should we start Dak or Trevor Law full PPR? For me, it's Dak. I just like the matchup versus Green Bay. What about you, Coach?
Yeah, I think it's Dak too. And we just talked about, it's funny, ironic, Sheldon, great timing. We're talking about the Cowboys breakdown here. But yeah, I think it's Dak. I think now it's his 3rd game in. He looked very, very good last week after being limited a little bit the week prior. I think they were a little bit safer with the play calling. You saw him last week open things up a little bit. But fundamentally, they're staying with the run game to set up the naked bootleg, to set up the intermediate. They're taking calculated play action shots. So I like what Dallas is doing offensively. Trevor Lawrence has improved. I mean, Trevor Lawrence is starting to come on a little bit, but I like Dak's matchup better this week, so I'm starting Dak this week, full PPR. Not that it
Yep,
matters
especially
what
with him
matchup.
going against Kansas. I
Yeah.
mean, I guess a negative script for Jacksonville versus Kansas City could bode well for Trevor Lawrence, but I'm still going with Dak. Here we go. Los Angeles Chargers. This is a Sunday night football game, 5-3 at the San Francisco 49ers, 4-4. Los Angeles Chargers on the offense. They're scoring 23 points per game, 13th in the NFL, 275 yards passing, 89.1 yards rushing. San Francisco defensively, one of the top defensive units in the league, 18.4 points per game, sixth in the NFL, 199 yards passing, eighth in the NFL, and 86 against the run, first in the NFL. Out, we know about Keenan Allen, we know about Mike Williams. I would say that your must start in this one is Austin Eckler. Austin Eckler on the year is he's the RB3 for this week, but on the year, he's one of the top 2 running backs in fantasy football. And I'd also feel very comfortable starting Gerald Everett. Sitting Isaiah Spiller, I mean, we haven't seen much. He was active, or I should say, a non-injured inactive for most of the year. So we're sitting them. We're sitting Sony Michel. We're sitting Michael Bandy. Justin Herbert. I mean, if you got Justin Herbert, I'm starting him. And then I might start 2 of their receivers. I like what Josh Palmer did in his opportunity last week. And if you look at San Francisco versus the slot position, they haven't played well against slot receivers. So I like DeAndre Carter as well. Coach, you got anything you want to add for the San Diego? I'm going to call them San Diego as long as I possibly. I mean, they're
You're
San
sticking
Diego.
with it, man. Yeah, you are sticking
So,
with it.
yeah, I'm going
No,
to be committed.
Yeah, I don't blame you. I agree with you. I don't know why I had Josh Palmer as my tweener, between start and sits, but Josh Palmer to me is a must start this week in this game. So I think he's the clear wide receiver one, and how they utilize him. I think DeAndre Carter becomes a little bit more of a vertical threat, and of course you've got your tight end there too. So yeah, man, I think you broke it down perfectly. I couldn't have said it any better, man. I think with Keenan Allen and Mike Williams out, let's look for Gerald Everett and Josh Palmer in the passing game, and Austin Eckler, man. You're starting him with a lot of confidence every week.
Okay, hey, let's move on to San Francisco 49er offense. They still are in San Francisco, right, Coach?
They are. They are still in
Okay,
San
good. All
Francisco.
right. Hey, I'm batting 50% on this one. All right, San Francisco offensively, 22 points a game, 237 yards passing per game, and 119 yards rushing. Defensively for the Chargers, they're 25.8 points a game, 30th in the NFL, giving up 206 yards passing and 145 yards rushing. Must start, obviously, CMC, Christian McCaffrey, and George Kittle. George Kittle has given you tight end one like production over the last few weeks. I like him. Sitting Jimmy Garoppolo, sitting Elijah Mitchell, but I'm so glad to see him back. Talk about a great story coming out of what was it, Louisiana Tech? That's what I call them. And he just activated off the IR. Like to see what he's going to do, but I'm not starting him. Others, I don't care. If I got Deebo Samuel on my team, I'm starting him. And I really like the production you've got out of Brandon Ayuk, so I'm playing him as well. Coach, anything you want to add to the San Francisco offense?
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, I think that Deebo Samuel being a guy that's in that other category is a guy that we're probably all saying we're probably starting, right? Just because of his explosiveness. But it's just recognizing Derwin James and what the Chargers have been able to do defensively. They're only giving up 155 yards passing over the last 3 games. So that's where there's a little bit of hesitancy that says, hey, if you've got a clear-cut guy that you can play, that is going to see the target share and have an opportunity, that maybe you start him over a Debo if you've only got guys out on the bye week. But Debo's a guy you're starting otherwise. But yeah, I mean, I think you covered that pretty well. We got a question.
We do. It is a let's see it. I'm sorry, I'm having trouble seeing this right now. We got, should I drop Higbee for Komet today? All right. I do have Cole Komet ranked higher this week going into this game. It's a lot to do with the matchup going facing Detroit and Higbee going against Arizona. So I would do that. What do you think, Coach?
Yeah, I think it's interesting, right? If Matthew Stafford can go, I think you look at Higbee being more relevant because Kevin O'Connell, again, loves the tight end screen. You've seen Higbee's target share be consistent outside of Higbee and Cooper Kupp. There's not a whole lot of consistency in the passing game in terms of target share. But so I lean Higbee because he's proven he's done it more often. And I think if you're going to throw John Wofford in, the screen game is a lot about timing. It's a lot about understanding kind of what's going on. And so I favor Stafford versus Wofford there, obviously. But Um, man, it's a tough pick for me. It's a coin toss, man. I like what Chicago's doing offensively. Cole Kmet, you're starting to see a little bit more a part of that game, but I still lean Higbee because I tend to lean with the player that's done it better recently. And even though Cole Kmet is coming on, I still think Higbee's a start, but I certainly wouldn't blame anybody for going Cole Kmet there either.
So I don't know how much that helps you, Chase, since I say go with Komet and he says Higby. But either way, we hope whatever route you go works out well for you. Hey, let's move on to the Monday night football game. Washington Commanders 4-5. Your favorite team in the NFL, the Philadelphia Eagles 8-0. Coach, break down the Washington offense for us.
Yeah, so Washington's averaging 19 points per game. They're not lighting the scoreboard up by any means. 177 or 196 yards passing per game. And where they found a little bit of a niche is in the rushing game, with 133 yards rushing. But unfortunately, you're playing against a Philadelphia defense that is third in the NFL against the pass. They're only giving up 158 yards through the air. But where they have been susceptible, they've given up 148.7 yards rushing per game over the last 3 games. If there's a way you're going to attack Philadelphia, it's through the run game. And Washington is starting to figure out how to run the ball a little bit better with Brian Robinson and Antonio Gibson, and with J.D. McKissick out. Also, Carson Wentz obviously out. I'm not starting anybody in this offense, to be honest with you. There's not anybody on this offense I'm confident in. You could make an argument for Antonio Gibson. He's been the guy on third downs they've used in the passing game with McKissick out. But his numbers and metrics in the run game are not great. I'm not sitting. I'm sitting Taylor Heineke. He's finished as a QB 13, the QB 8, and the QB 15 over his first 3 starts. So it sounds great, but that was against Minnesota, Green Bay, and Indianapolis. Eagles are a different story. Last week, he completed 54% of his passes for only 149 yards, but he was saved by 2 touchdowns. He did have the interception. Eagles rank second in fantasy points per game against quarterbacks with just 11.4. So I'm not trusting Taylor Heineke there. I don't trust Brian Robinson. He's 59th in yards after contact per attempt and 57th in PFF elusive rating. He's a touchdown or bust guy, and he's not involved in the passing game at all. He's 3.3 yards per carry on 67 carries. So as much as I love the story and I love Brian Robinson, I liked him coming out. I thought there was going to be a niche for him early in the season. Or I should say early in his return. It just hasn't looked like that's paying off. But if there's anybody that deserves a few more games to make a full judgment, it's Brian Robinson. I don't love Logan Thomas. The Eagles have only give up 6.6 fantasy points per game to tight ends and just 3 targets since his return. So, I mean, I don't know where you're at with that breakdown, but I think Terry McLaurin's the guy you might make arguments for.
The only difference I would have is I'm starting Terry McLaurin anytime.
I just say that, yep.
And I wouldn't. Granted, they're facing a tough Philadelphia Eagles, but he is so talented. I wouldn't be surprised to see a 3-catch or 4-catch performance for 75 to 80 yards with a touchdown, just because the guy just finds ways to make plays. Let's move on.
If you look at just real quick, if you look at his last 3 games, I mean, 25 targets, 16 grabs for 240, clearly made him the. Unfortunately, he lines up on the outside, and you get Darius Slay and James Bradbury, who's given up 36% and 38% passer rating, respectively. That's where I struggle to make him a must start. But I get it. I love his talent. I'm with you. I understand it.
Why don't you break down the Philadelphia Eagles offense? This is where it's going to be a little more fun, because I'll tell you what, is there a better fantasy offense than Philadelphia Eagle offense right now?
God, yeah, they're pretty explosive right now. Philadelphia's offense has averaged 30 points per game over the last 3 games, 213 yards passing. They don't have to pass the football to be relevant. They're averaging 130 yards rushing on the ground over the last 3, but 150 on the season. And the Washington defense, they're actually decent. They're 11th in the NFL. They're only giving up 76.3 yards rushing over the last 3, 11th on the season, 113. So they've defended the run pretty well. They've defended the pass at only 209 yards per game. So Washington's starting to play a little better defensively. But again, Jalen Hurts is your QB2 this week. Could easily be your QB1. He's only got 1 finish outside the top 12. So he's been a QB1 every single week but 1. He leads the NFL. This is where I think the matchup gets interesting to take a deep dive. Hurts leads the NFL with play action touchdowns with 8, ranks 4th in play action passing yards, while the Washington defense gives up the 7th highest play action yards per attempt and 10th highest play action passer rating. Shout out to Derek Brown at Fantasy Pros for that little nugget. 12 touchdown passes, just 2 interceptions, and another 6 rushing touchdowns on the season with a 68% completion rate. You're going to play Jalen Hurts even with those numbers, but it's a great matchup for him. And then A.J. Brown, 5 touchdown receptions over the last 3 games. 24 targets in that time frame, 30% target share on the year. The absolute yak monsters. You're playing with him. You're playing him. I don't like Boston Scott. He's been pretty much, it's the Kenny Gainwell, Miles Sanders show. Miles Sanders really starting to see some RB1 volume. Kenny Gainwell getting some red zone touches. So I'm out on Boston Scott. I'm out on any wide receiver 3 in this offense. Quez Watkins, there's just not enough touches to go around with Devontae Smith and AJ Brown and Dallas Goedert. So you can make an argument to start Miles Sanders. He wasn't targeted last week, and he's not seeing the red zone touches that we would like to see him get. I think there's being split between Hurts and Gainwell and him, so there's a little bit. He's not a must start for me. But Washington does give up the passing yards in the passing game to running backs. So again, there you go. So, and Devontae Smith, back-to-back wide receiver 54 finishes. Not a guy that only 4 red zone targets on the season. Love the talent. He's only topped 87 yards once this year in terms of receiving yards. So I just don't have a lot of confidence in Devontae Smith right now.
Yeah, it's been tough. Everyone talked about his BMI coming in and how he would struggle to be physical enough to play wide receiver against those big cornerbacks. And for whatever the reason, he just hasn't been able to get it going as of late. But that Philadelphia Eagle offense is always fun to watch. I'm glad to get to see it all by itself tonight in the Sunday night game. Coach, appreciate everything you do. You absolutely kill it week in, week out. Let's hope for a Dallas win, and let's hope for a lot of points for our fantasy teams this week.
All I heard was let's hope for a Dallas win. Everything after that just got completely. I don't even know what you said, man. Just a bunch of lips moving. But
well,
no,
that's
man.
usually how you listen to me anyway. So it's all good. It's all good.
Always appreciate you, brother. You smash it every week as always, man. So looking forward to it. Hopefully your San Francisco 49ers get a win this week as well. Hopefully Jeff Wilson balls out in Miami for you. I know you're a Wilson guy, so good luck to you, man. Hope your teams win this weekend.
All right. Hey, everybody. Thank you so much for the questions. Make sure to tune in on Wednesday night for our midweek show. We go live at 7 p.m. You can hear us on Anchor. You can hear us on Apple. You can hear us on Spotify, and you can see the stream on YouTube. Appreciate everyone. Get lots of points today. Good luck.